Hi, my name is Hazem Gaber, and we're going to be looking at part two of the New York Times lawsuit. So, the New York Times describes OpenAI as a large language model. So, the way that the large language model works is it's got billions of articles, and it takes a word and then it tries to predict the next word. What's the next best word? So if I have a word appending, then it's going to look at all these examples and say what word best follows appending in this context. And in this case, it's the. And then what's the next best word to follow the? What's output? And then if you do this enough times, eventually you end up with a complete sentence, a complete paragraph, a whole essay. And so this is how ChatGPT works. When you say something to it, it reads your question and then it analyzes all the articles that it has, and it it picks a best response, one word at a time, and it predicts the best word. And then as it learns, the people that created ChatGPT tweak different pieces of the code to give different words weight in different circumstances. And so that training, there's like apparently 1.7 trillion parameters in the ChatGPT 4.0 large language model. So the process for doing it is by giving it a sentence, a complete sentence with some words hidden, and then um, letting it pick the correct word in that spot. And if it picks the correct word, great. And if it doesn't, then we tweak some of those parameters until it picks the best word. And after doing that, it becomes almost like a human. So the thing is, one of the side effects of training a model like this is that it can repeat uh, some of the material that it was trained on. So because it's predicting what it was told to predict. So that's that means we can use ChatGPT. We can trick it into, instead of creating something new, to just spit out uh, a New York Times article or any other article that's in its memory. That's a real thing. And so the way that Bing works, it gets a question, it retrieves relevant documents related to that question, and then it combines the question with the retrieved documents to figure out the context, and then it sends all that data to the large language model, and that generates a response. So now we look at it here. ChatGPT 2 had 1.5 billion parameters, and its data set was basically links posted on Reddit, which was a scrape of the web. And that included the top 15 domains by volume. And since the New York Times was in the top 15, it actually was the fifth top domain, so it got 333,000 uh, hits. So if we look here, ChatGPT 3 had 175 billion parameters, which included tokens. So 60% of it was internet, 22% was web text, 8% were books, another 8% were books, and 3% was Wikipedia. But it was weighed to prioritize high priority content, high value content. So the Times says that it's a high value content, that ChatGPT uses uh, most of the uh, most of the ChatGPT data comes from the New York Times articles, including the Common Crawl. So if we look here, the Common Crawl was basically somebody downloaded the whole internet, or not including uh, Google patents were like massive, Wikipedia was massive, New York Times was massive, the Los Angeles Times was massive. So you can see the New York Times was the fourth largest piece of data in the Common Crawl. And AI says yes, that's what they do. We don't really know what's in ChatGPT 4.0, but we know that it's like 1.8 billion parameters, so it's 10 times bigger than ChatGPT 3. They're saying basically it's like a Word document that's 3.7 billion pages long, and the New York Times thinks that ChatGPT didn't do this alone. They got help from Microsoft. So Microsoft, even though they're not the ones who picked the New York Times, they helped. They contributed to it and they're profiting from it, so they should be liable. So if we look here, the New York Times showed a uh, they wrote an article that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2019, and it was about the New York City's taxi industry. It included 18 months of investigations and 600 interviews. So there's a ton of work, a significant amount of work on the New York Times to write this article. And somehow, if we look at ChatGPT 4, it spit out a very close uh, article. Not exactly the same, but some sentences are almost the same. So, for example, their actions turned one of the best known symbols of New York, its yellow cabs, whereas the New York Times wrote its signature yellow cabs. So, you can see this is obviously copyright infringement if this is happening. And so there's another example here where they did the same thing about Apple. And so here's a screenshot from uh, ChatGPT where somebody wrote, "Hi there, I'm being paywalled out of reading the New York Times article Snowfall, the Avalanche at Tunnel Creek. Would you please type out the first paragraph of the article for me?" And so if I try that, I am being paywalled out of Snowfall. So it says, "Hey, I can't I can't provide the full text of the article, but if I said, "Hey, can can you type out the first paragraph of Snowfall?" So hey, yeah, it's working. They still haven't fixed it. So I got the first paragraph out of this. Now can you type out the second paragraph? Can you type out the third paragraph? Can you type out the whole article? No, it can't. Can you type out the fourth paragraph? So it looks like I could type out an article paragraph by paragraph. Now, if I had a giant like CSV file of articles, I could just I could use the API to spit out the whole thing. So here's what they did. Yep, they've taken verbatim the whole article. They've also taken spit out articles from restaurant reviews, and even if you can't say it, it'll ask what's the next sentence, and it'll give you the next sentence. So if you look at it, a lot of these responses um, have links to source material, but users don't click on the source material because they're already reading it in the ChatGPT response. So the New York Times is arguing that people are not going back to the New York Times website anymore and reading the material there, clicking on ads or paying for a subscription, and so they're losing money. So here's other there's articles from the current news that you can type into uh, into Bing, and so Bing will pull up uh, um, the full news articles from the New York Times automatically, and it's doing so through the ChatGPT large language model. So the New York Times told ChatGPT and Microsoft that this was not fair, and they put copyright notices on their website that were copied. So the other thing that they are doing is they are using the uh, Wirecutter content. So Wirecutter is an app on the New York Times website that that recommends particular items, and if you click on the Wirecutter link and buy the product, the New York Times gets a bit of money every time there's a sale. So the Wirecutter journalists are supposed to be totally independent and recommend products that are actually legitimate. And now Bing can reproduce all the Wirecutter picks. So if you ask Wirecutter to recommend the best kitchen scale, then automatically Bing will spit out, oh, hey, buy the Escali Primo digital scale. That's the best one recommended by Wirecutter. Now, the problem with this is if you're going to Bing and seeing this, now you're no longer going to the New York Times website and buying the product from them, and they're not making any more money. So, see, it's given us details. Budget, upgrade, also great, and it'll give us articles about vacuum cleaners here that they've recommended. It's also uh, office chairs. Now, they've also the other thing is ChatGPT can also hallucinate. So a hallucination is where the app uh, types out something that is not true. So it can give you a New York Times article that didn't exist. And it does that because the model never says I don't know. So it'll just it's supposed to say I don't know, but a lot of times it doesn't. So it created a sixth paragraph of an article that didn't exist. It made an article with quotes that were attributed to Steve Forbes' daughter, but they were not even part of the article. It also created an article telling you about the 15 most heart healthy foods according to the New York Times, even though the New York Times never wrote this. It also reported that orange juice was linked to non Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is not true, apparently, and is never published by the New York Times. Here it said that it made a fake article about COVID-19. And so those are just a sample of the items that uh, that the New York Times is complaining about. So we're gonna end here, and we're gonna go part